We are going to look at a more robust argument in support of Kantianism. And the way this argument works is this. We're going to roll out each reason statement one at a time with the assumption that these reason statements being true will lead to the conclusion also being true. In other words, as we roll out each reason statement, you need to consider whether or not that statement is true or false. And if you get all the way to the end of the list of reason statements and you haven't identified one that you believe is false, then there's a high degree of likelihood that you will also need to accept that conclusion is true as well. But if you find even one premise that you think is false, then you don't necessarily have to accept the conclusion of the argument. One thing to keep in mind as you evaluate this argument is this. It's not uncommon for people to judge a particular reason statement false because they've misread it or they haven't read exactly what it says. So you want to look at the exact wording of each of these reason statements as you're judging whether it's a true statement or a false statement. Okay, so reason number one. Emotions and passions are irrational. Okay, that doesn't mean that emotions and passions are bad. It just means that emotions and passions, they're not bound by the rules of reason. My sense of love or fear or anger, it's not something that is governed by the rules of logic. It's something that's happening in my body, and it can even overwhelm my ability to think rationally and clearly. Okay, so premise number one is emotions and passions are irrational. They're not rational. We don't choose the emotions or passions that we experience, says premise number two. So I don't choose to feel angry. I don't choose to feel hungry. I don't choose to feel happiness. These are feelings that just kind of happen to me. If I could choose to be happy, then why the heck wouldn't I just choose to be happy all the time and choose never to be angry? But of course, we know that these emotions, these passions that we experience, these are not the things that we choose to experience. We may choose to think about things that we know will make us angry or make us happy, but we can't choose to be happy. Okay, these things kind of happen to us. And we can't control our emotions and our passions. Okay, we can't control these things. We can control how we respond to them. But I can't just simply sit here and say, okay, stop feeling angry. I don't have that ability to control my emotions that way. These emotions and passions seem to be out of my control, and I have to work hard to develop my ability to control how I respond to those feelings. Premise number four says this: if we act impulsively on emotion or passion and not deliberatively on reason when making moral judgments, then we've bound our moral judgments to the irrational, uncontrollable part of ourselves. Okay, so maybe you want to pause and read this premise over again. It seems to me it's probably true. If I'm just acting impulsively on my emotion or my passion at any given moment, and I'm doing so in the moral realm, then it seems like I've kind of bound the moral judgments that I'm making to this very uncontrollable, irrational part of myself. Premise number five says, if we bind our moral judgments to the irrational, uncontrollable part of ourselves, then we compromise or surrender our ability to think deliberatively and rationally. That is, to use the rules of reason about moral judgments. So again, think about this, that when you have experienced very powerful emotions in your life, doesn't it kind of compromise your ability to think clearly and rationally? This is why we tell somebody who's really worked up about something like, okay, calm down. By the way, that's the worst thing to say to somebody who's worked up about something. But we say to somebody, look, I think you need to sleep on this. I think you need to chill out before you make a decision here because your emotions may compromise your ability to think clearly and think rationally. Premise number six says this: if we compromise or surrender our ability to think deliberatively and rationally about moral judgments, then we've compromised or surrendered our status as free, autonomous, moral beings. Because remember, for Kant, to be able to think rationally, you have to be free. Okay? You have to be free in order to exercise free will and in order to think rationally. And so if we surrender or compromise our status as free, autonomous moral beings, we've compromised our freedom. Number seven says, if we've compromised or surrendered our status as free, autonomous human beings, then we've degraded ourselves, Kant says. Essentially, we've enslaved ourselves to our emotions and our passions. This is exactly what Kant says, is We don't choose our passions, they choose us. And we're enslaved by those passions. We can't choose to not have them have the effect on us that they're having. We can only choose how to respond to these passions and emotions that seem to capture us. Okay, so premise number 7, if we've compromised or surrendered our status as free, autonomous moral beings, then we've degraded ourselves. We've compromised our dignity. Number 8, to preserve our dignity as human beings, we must maintain our status as free, autonomous, moral beings. Premise number 9, to maintain our status as free, autonomous, moral beings, we must rely on our uniquely human capacity for analytic, logical analysis when making moral judgments. Therefore, here's our conclusion that is said to follow from all of these premises. Moral judgment should be rooted in the principles of logic and reason rather than in emotion or passion. Okay, so you can see how this conclusion is, it's not just a direct challenge to like a motivist type of thinking. It's also a challenge to utilitarian thinking, right? Because for the utilitarian, what mattered most was particular states of being, in particular those ones that we desire, the happiness, the contentment, the satisfaction that we all seem to be pursuing. That's what mattered to the utilitarian. And here's Kant saying, no. What matters most is your dignity as a free, rational creature. And in order to protect that, you've got to make sure you are not simply responding to your impulses, your emotions, and your passions. You have to identify what the right thing to do is by using the power of logic and rationality. So what does that look like when you do that? We'll see.